Welcome to the World of Horror Podcast, episode 96. I'm Mom.
And I'm Mac.
This is the podcast where we share our love of international horror. Fear is universal, but we are not afraid of subtitles. WoHos! This week, Mac's genre pick is movies about nuclear holocaust. We reviewed The Day After from the US and Threads from the UK. Before we get into it, fair warning, these discussions will include spoilers and language which may not be suitable for all listeners. Let's move on to our first segment, Mom and Mac Chat. Hi, Mac. How is 2023 going?
Well, so far, I did get very sick over the weekend, and that was not fun. But that always seems to happen to me during this time of year. Like, without fail, I get sick.
Yeah, and I also got sick. But you got like super sick because it seems like you had a stomach bug and a head bug at the same time.
I don't know why, what I did, or like, I also don't ever leave my house. So whenever stuff like that happens, I'm just like, come on. What was it?
Well, I'm exposed to a lot of people, and we just started back to school, so it wasn't a big surprise.
Yeah.
That I got sick.
Teachers should get hazard pay.
I mean, I'm glad, I was telling somebody the other day, I'm glad I don't work with little kids, because that's like a whole nother level, but
you're going to get sick.
Yeah, for sure you are. I mean, like in January and August, like for sure you are.
Yeah.
But mine wasn't too bad. I mean, it's just never great, and then it just sort of takes you out of the game for a little bit. So here we are on the 26th of January, recording our first episode. You want to just get into it?
Sure.
So I thought this was an interesting pick, Mac, and I know you had said that you had seen Threads. And to me, these two movies are kind of like a rough draft and a final draft.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like,
they did come out one year after another, and Mick Jackson, the director of the second movie, the Superior movie, I guess, was a little dismayed to learn that there was another one, that was in the works. But then when he saw it, he's like, oh, no, I can completely go ahead and make my movie.
Yeah, they're like worlds. Like, it is interesting that I do think they're very good as like a comparison, because they're both trying to do the same thing, but they're worlds apart.
And I just rewatched The Day After because we were planning to do this a few weeks ago, and then everything happened. So I wanted to refresh myself. And it's not terrible. It's not good, for sure.
No. It's so interesting because I watched it on YouTube, and if you look in the comments, there's all these people like who, I'm sure this was a formative movie for them. Like, if it was, airing when you were a kid in America, and you will only have access to that and not Threads. But all these people were like, oh my gosh, like they should show this in schools, and like this should be required viewing for everyone. And I just want to be like, listen, I get what you're saying, but not this one. Threads, yes, not this.
Yeah. Well, it was. So it came out in 83, I believe, and so that would have made me 14. And
you had to watch it?
I didn't have to watch it, no, but it was a big deal at the time. It showed on television, and it's hard for you, I'm sure, to not just you. I'm sure it's hard for people today to understand that we only had 3, maybe 4 networks, and so when there was a show like this, it was an event, and they got a lot of viewers on this because there wasn't nothing else going on, and it did make a huge impact. But then, and I don't even know how I found out about Threads, but I did see it at the time. That one just really shook me. It's kind of like in, I think, 87, I'm going to say, but I might be wrong on that. I had seen Full Metal Jacket, which is a movie about Vietnam, and then I saw Platoon, and I was like, Platoon's fine, But to me, Full Metal Jacket is a far superior movie. And so this was kind of like that too. Like they came out relatively in the same time period, but really, I think the makers of Threads really nailed it.
I think Brits in general, just based off of I this is a genre I really like, of like trying to capture realism, but in kind of like a documentary way. And I feel like British movies do it so well. Like maybe it's just that they've got the whole like BBC reporting thing down, and that's how it like comes across. And maybe it's because they're British. I don't know. Maybe if you just have an announcer, or there was no announcer, but like, do you know what I mean? It's just, it felt like there are people who were casually mean, you know, like imperfect people. It felt like you were looking at like a real set of people. Whereas I feel like in American things, there's heroes, pure perfect people, and then evil people, and that's it. And I feel like Threads just seemed like a more realistic, holistic view. I don't know. The Day After was so cheesy to me.
Yeah,
in so many ways.
I think cheesy.
The ending.
I watched them. I saw the ending today. I watched half of it last night and half of it today, and the ending was like, okay, I see what you're going for, but wow, this is
swinging a huge miss.
Yeah. So they're basically, you know, they're concerning the same thing. The treatment is totally different though, because with The Day After, we spend an hour getting to know all of our characters, and there are a lot of characters, like a lot. And then the missiles go off, the war happens, whatever, and then we get, I don't know, maybe up to a month after, would you say? Mm-hmm. Not a very long time after the blast. Whereas in Threads, it's a whole 13-year span, which I thought was so effective. So
haunting.
So the brief synopsis of The Day After is the effects of a devastating nuclear holocaust on small-town residents of eastern Kansas. It was written by Edward Hume and directed by Nicholas Meyer. And it's really Jason Robards' movie. There are a lot of other actors, but it's really his like showpiece. And it also features Jo Beth Williams, Steve Guttenberg. John Cullum has a pretty big role. He's the farmer man. Johnny Go-Go. And Amy Madigan as the pregnant mother. Cinematography was by Gain Rescher, and the release date was November 20th, 1983 on ABC. It has a running time of 126 motherfucking minutes.
You will feel every minute.
Oh, you will. I also watched.
Can you imagine this with commercials? Well, you can. You did it, but I cannot.
Oh, there was something in the trivia about that. I'm not sure if there were commercials. I don't think there were commercials after the blast, is what I think they did. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Whatever. So, okay. I mean, so mostly it features this Dr. Oakes, and he's an old, sweet doctor man. And there were a couple scenes. I like the scene in the beginning with his wife where they're remembering the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they got through that, so they'll get through this too. And nothing happened then, so nothing is going to happen now. Those sort of fateful words. But I liked the chemistry between the actors. They did seem like a married couple, and like they really love each other a whole bunch. There was a sort of cheesy moment, kind of memorable to me, with the other married couple, where as the bombs are going off or just about to, she is concerned with making the bed. And he has to carry her screaming down into the cellar.
Okay, that is like a scene that sometimes you find peppered into things written by men, and I'm just like, how hysterical do you think women are? Like, she's like, ah, like she's like losing it. Like excuse, like if we're talking about a family unit, what is this lie that it's always like only the men holding everything together? Like, excuse you, like. we all know women are running the show,
And
right?
also
Like,
contrast that with the women in Threads, where there is a similar scene where Ruth and Jimmy are removing wallpaper from the wall, and she cries quietly in the corner, and he reaches out to her and he's like, hey, hey. And that's just a more human and honest depiction of a couple.
yeah. And she's like crying. It's like, you know, one of those moments where she's frustrated and crying at that, but it's not at that, it's at the whole world. Whereas this woman is making the bed while a bomb goes off.
All of the female characters in The Day After can just fuck
They're
right off.
They're so dumb.
Yeah, they're real dumb.
They have no brain cells.
I mean, I know it was 83, but I mean, still,
That's
pretty
just
frustrating.
Like, no, you didn't have any woman proofread it.
No, for sure you didn't. So we've got these two families, Jason Robards' family and John Cullum's family. Then you also have airmen. I hadn't thought about this, but it's like all the units are kind of written in reference to the man.
Yeah.
You know?
Only.
So there's Airman First Class Billy McCoy. So he's our token black character, and he goes through it. He gets radiation poisoning and goes crazy and dies. Who else? Oh, we got Johnny Go-Go. He is a professor, a young, little fresh-faced John Go.
I remember now you saying he was in it, but while watching it, I did not recognize him.
No, yeah. He had a good time in the 80s. So there was The World According to Garp, where he played a trans woman. And there was, oh gosh, what was the name of that movie? I don't remember that. It was a really big tearjerker movie where the daughter dies of cancer. And anyway, I can't remember it now. I'll put it in the notes. And then he also was, of course, the preacher in Footloose. So, you know, he sort of had a run there in the 80s. But yeah, I had forgotten that he was in this too. But he has that fateful line that I looked it up on Snopes and it's unproven. But apparently, according to this script, Einstein had said he wasn't sure how World War III would be fought, but World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. So let's see. I mean, I don't know. What else do you want to say about this movie?
I want to talk more shit about it.
How about when that one daughter freaks out? They've been in the cellar for 5 days.
Yeah, and I will say, interestingly, Ruth also freaks out in the cellar, but
True.
Again, I empathized. I understood kind of the impulse. You're already so stressed out from being pregnant and away from your guy. And I could see going back into a childlike, state of I can't, and also I can't wipe my Nana's ass, I can't deal with all of this, I could see myself doing shutting down in a similar way, not like this girl who's I'm gonna get out, again, hysterical,
yeah. So she runs out into the field, and there's all
the dumb bitch she is.
There's all this radiation, like dust on the ground, and it just, to me, it looked like flour or something. But
the way that they did the radiation in this was so not scary to me, whereas in Threads it's terrifying. In this one, it was such a everybody was no, don't go outside. It just did not feel. It seemed like this nebulous thing of then you'll go crazy from experiencing it, and the way that they depicted that was so bizarre, and it felt so, since it didn't seem realistic, it wasn't scary to me, because the only thing this kind of movie has, it should be the realism. That's what should be freaking you out.
But she's also running through these fields of the corpses of all these farm animals. And Steve Guttenberg, she's like, see, the sun's out. It's a beautiful day. Everything's fine. And he's like, even though you can't smell it, and even though you can't see it. And his acting is horrible too, but he basically has to manhandle her back into the cellar. And so that's ridiculous. There's this whole section with Billy McCoy when he meets the mute man. And
Yes,
they
that was
are
bizarre.
under a blanket, walking together, eating Baby Ruth candy bars together. And you have the little boy, Danny, who goes blind from looking at the flash. And he's just never going to see again. But he's wise
boy.
beyond his years because he knows that the Asian doctor isn't Italian. He's Asian. And why? I don't understand.
It's so dumb. And also, of course, yeah, people died in it. Also, talk about them special effects. Like, I know that it's a TV movie, but it was just like, it just looked so stupid to me.
You mean when the Flash came?
Yes, when it just was like, boop, skeleton, dead. Like, it felt like there wasn't even an attempt.
Right. It's so much more effective in the Threads movie, and it was only a year later.
And it didn't seem like they had a huge budget either.
No.
Yeah.
There's also, of course, because it's the U.S., there's this speech we hear from the president who announces a ceasefire with the Soviets, and he says that, we will rebuild, and we're a country of liberty and democracy. And as this voiceover is happening in the background, we see everybody sort of, without hope, just sort of looking haggard, and hospital staff piling up the dead and treating the living by candlelight. And, it's just, I know what they were trying to do with that, with layering his voiceover on top of those scenes, but boy, it was just like flat. Like, it just was like not.
And at the end, they even reference it probably would be even worse than this. And in my head, I was like, yeah, because this honestly, it seemed bad, but it seemed more like a natural disaster. It felt like a movie you could have made. I mean, obviously without the, part where people were vaporized, but the aftermath part was totally just like, what if the government didn't get to you and all the resources were gone? That's all that it felt like. And that is scary, but it's not really what I think of when I think of the horrors of nuclear war.
It is really male and patriarchal and capitalistic because we have both men, the patriarchs of these two families, sort of returning to their homes. And when John Cullum returns to his home, he's actually shot by squatters. And
again, there's evil people. Then there's the hero guys.
But then we have Jason Robards at the end. He goes back and he's like, "Get out of my house." There's no house. It's just the site of his house. And one of the people there offers him some food, and he collapses onto his knees. And then another man comes up to him, and they put their heads together, and they bow their heads together, and that's the end of that movie.
And that whole set, it kind of reminded me of the set of Jesus Christ Superstar.
Oh, really? I haven't seen that in so long.
It looks like the rocks crumbling and everything. It looks the same. You don't look at that and think, I'm looking at a burnt building. Again, not in the same way Threads looks like, that looks like a town that's been destroyed,
It did sort of seem like a play in a lot of ways. And at the end, we have the disclaimer: the catastrophic events you have just witnessed are, in all likelihood, less severe than the destruction that would actually occur in the event of a full nuclear strike against the United States. It is hoped that the images of this film will inspire the nations of this earth, their peoples and leaders, to find the means to avert the fateful day. So I wanted to talk about what phobia is that? So ballistrophobia is the fear of missiles or bullets.
I think I have that.
And fundophobia is a fear of farms.
I guess some people got it.
Yeah.
I mean, they are disgusting. So.
Yeah, I've never been attracted to living on a farm or.
Yeah.
Visiting
It's
a
truly
farm?
I mean, anybody who's making food, we owe society to you. At the same time, seems like hell to me. Your life is just work. And
Yeah,
I am
basically.
lazy.
I'm
I'm too soft for that.
I like following people on TikTok. Like there's this guy who I think his handle something like the Goat Daddy or something, and he's a young guy, but he just shows like giving milk to the goats, and I don't know, whatever.
Aww.
And I just love all those people who have sanctuaries and stuff. And
Yeah.
I grew up in Wisconsin, so I did visit a lot of farms when I was a kid. But I always think of the time in high school where our field trip was to go to this place where they they impregnated cows, and we had to wear these like rubber boots on our feet because of all the bulges.
Why
on the
did
floor.
they take you there?
I don't know. It was disgusting, and I saw things that I wish I hadn't seen. All right.
What were you supposed to learn?
I don't know. It was probably like some teacher was like, they're saying that, we need to have a full curriculum and, enrichment activities. And this farm, or not a farm, but it's like a place where they.
It's a place.
It's a place where they make more cows.
That's a really good way to put it.
Well, okay, what do you call that when you make animals make other animals?
Impregnate?
Well, yes, but it's there's a term
husbandry?
for it. Yes. Animal husbandry. It was like a husbandry operation. Okay, let's
it's a neat little way to put it. I guess they can't say, guys, we're taking you to the impregnation farm. Get your permission slips.
No doubt. This is weird. And I think I got a pretty good education, but that was weird. And I don't know what was going on with that. But this film originally aired, as I said, November 20th, 1983. It remains the most watched TV movie in U.S. history. Estimates with the viewership at over 100 million Americans with a Nielsen share of 62%. So it was a very watched show.
I want to know the other 38%. What were they watching? What thing that they were like, I'm not watching that.
And so one thing about this one is they left it sort of ambiguous, like who struck first.
Please.
After the film's broadcast, a special news program featured a live discussion between Dr. Carl Sagan, who opposed the use of nuclear weapons, and conservative writer William F. Buckley, who supported the concept of, quote, nuclear deterrence.
Oh, God.
During this heated discussion, aired live, Dr. Sagan introduced the concept of, quote, nuclear winter and made his famous analogy, quote, imagine a room awash in gasoline, and there are two implacable enemies in that room. One of them has 9,000 matches, the other 7,000 matches. Each of them is concerned about who's ahead, who's stronger. And I had a false memory of this. Somehow I thought I was younger when I saw it, but I do remember a teacher, like the week this aired, saying that he thought it was good that this sort of thing was being shown because it showed the concept of mutually assured destruction. And he had hope that there would never be a nuclear war because of that.
I mean, dear God, I hope so too.
2 weeks before the movie aired, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood aired a week of episodes titled, quote, Conflict, that dealt with war and nuclear bombs. Many believed it was a direct response to the movie, but it was just coincidence. The episodes were written and produced at least a year before the movie aired.
This is incredible. Like three, like the mood and the, you know, everybody just must have been thinking about this so much.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
amazing that three separate, you know, places were like, yeah, let's make a movie or special about this.
Well, I sent you that Ronald Reagan commercial.
Yes.
You know, there's a bear in the woods. That was very famous.
So spooky.
I mean, and the propaganda, you can see how effective it was on some people. The idea is that there's this bear in the woods, and the text is something like, some people don't believe there is a bear in the woods, but what if there is? You know, like we have to like be prepared to fight the bear. And I remember that same teacher saying, why don't we just talk to the bear?
Yeah. Can we?
Yeah.
Gosh.
So.
Stuff, it's interesting, like, throughout, if you could track throughout, at least, I guess, recent human history, what the main apocalyptic or, I guess, like, related to war kind of fears that the populace had, you know? Because, I mean, obviously after 9/11, like, when I was a kid, just the idea of, like, it was, like, always kind of present in my mind because, again, the propaganda around 9/11 still is so fucking persistent and large to this day. And so at the time as a kid, I was, like, utterly terrified at the idea. And I didn't even have the same experience of, like, witnessing it happen. Like, I completely was removed from all that, and yet it still was, like, a very largely present fear in my head. And then, of course, with, like, well, this isn't related to war, but obviously, like, gun violence now is such a big thing that is kind of always present in my head, too, of being scared of.
Yeah. It's somebody had a tweet the other day, I think it was Graham Elwood had a tweet, that on the 23rd of January there had been 33 mass shootings this year.
Jesus.
And and the last line of his tweet was something like, none of us are safe. And it's not great. The FX show The Americans depicted the spy family watching the film with their FBI neighbor. And
the guy in that show,
The Americans?
the husband,
yeah.
We saw him in a play.
I know, and I didn't even know who he was, and you were like, you knew who he was.
From a soap opera.
We saw him in an off-Broadway play once.
He was really good.
He was really good. Oh, well, one thing I wanted to say is this last piece of trivia. Jason Robards Jr. appeared in another post-apocalyptic science fiction film, A Boy and His Dog, from 1975, which I had seen and totally forgot. And so I watched it again. And it's a totally different take. It's based on some short stories by the science fiction writer Harlan Ellison, who I was deeply into in middle and high school. It's good. It's real. It's good. It features Don Johnson, who plays an 18-year-old. I don't know how old he was, but kind of cool just to see these actors, you know, as really young people. What does Letterboxd have to say about it? Grape Carmine gave it a 0.5 star. My mom used to rent this frequently when I was a kid, and I always found it incredibly boring.
Why would
I want to know what's going on in that
like,
family?
Sweetie,
Can you put the tape in the VCR again?
We went to Blockbuster and Mom's getting The Day After again.
Oh, Mom.
Again?
Carrie Zander gave it 1.5 stars. Even though Threads came out a year after this movie, The Day After is like a really bad American interpretation of Threads.
I agree.
But Hannah Blasingame gave it 5 stars. Watched this movie as a kid. Messed me up for sure. Thumbs up emoji. Featured in my trauma dreams. Ash falling like snow. And Anaya gave it 5 stars. Yes, I totally watched this because I found out about it through The Americans. Best television show that ever was. Believe the hype. This movie is exactly as devastating and harrowing as it ought to be. It's the proper sequel to Failsafe. And for someone who is fairly stoic when it comes to horrific imagery, I had immediate and totally involuntary tears in my eyes when the thing happened. I feel like this should be necessary viewing for all of us in this day and age. All of us.
I can't imagine crying. I'm sorry. I'm trying to discount this person, but my reaction was, oh, brother. Like, I stepping into The Day After, I was like, ooh, I know this is going to be a rough one. And it was. Like this is what the YouTube comments were like. They were so like solemn and like reverent.
Yeah. Rose gave it 5 stars. My fixation on nuclear war media should probably be given a special mention in the DSM-6.
I understand this because I don't think it's not coincidental that after I watched Threads, I got my mind, or last year after I watched Threads, I got kind of fixated a little bit, not on actually like researching stuff about nuclear war, but just thinking about it. And there is a series of games called Fallout, which is, you've heard, yeah.
I've even heard of them, yeah.
It's a series of open world games made by Bethesda that takes place post nuclear apocalypse 200 years in the future. And I started playing Fallout 4, and it's widely like completely fantasy, like nothing in the realm, but still the idea of like a completely just leveled like landscape, because the thing that they do really well is these beautiful like realistic landscapes with just like buildings, flattened into the ground, and just that imagery is just so scary to me.
And I mean, they did have some of that in this movie, but I actually wanted to, before we move on to Threads, I wanted to mention another movie that I watched. I watched a bunch of these movies, and one that I guess I had never heard of was called Testament. And it is involving a suburban community outside of San Francisco. And so we have the husband going to work, in the big city, and the mom is left home with the kids. And then this blast hits San Francisco. And it's much better than The Day After. One of the things that I guess I hadn't realized is that all the kids would die.
Oh, God.
And that's at least what this movie Testament said, because I think she had 3 kids, and then just like one by one, they die, and she has to bury her kids. And it's just such a horrible thing. And the old people, too. So you're sort of left with, I guess, the healthiest people in their 20s and 30s when it's all over. And I hadn't thought of that. But because a lot of these other movies don't portray that. But yeah, all the kids would die. And
I think Threads did. They mentioned that the very young and the very old would all die.
Well, do you want to get into it? Or do you want to rate it? Do you want to? We don't.
Oh, what should we rate it in terms of?
What's the most
think of something funny,
memorable...
but I just draw blanks.
The most memorable image. Oh my God. And how about that makeup at the end with Steve Guttenberg and the bald cap? And
How about bald patches?
Okay, let's rate it in bald patches. Oh wow.
One.
Oh, you're not even going to two?
The radiation didn't hit me that hard. I only got one bald patch.
I'll give it a two, but it's not good, y'all. It's
I think it's probably significant that I have no nostalgia. I'm seeing it completely out of
yeah.
like the cultural context.
But I mean, there's no reason. I mean, if you're in your 50s like me and you want to go back and like see how you feel about it today versus how you felt about it at the time, yeah, go for it. But I mean, if you're not in your 50s, I wouldn't. I mean, really, honestly, Mac, like, I mean, can you find anything to recommend this? Like, it's not like the
No,
cinematography is inventive or the acting's really off the charts. It's just
I think
schlock.
you made a good point that this does feel like in a way the rough draft. So it's like why would you there's nothing of note and there's nothing in this movie that like that you're right that I would even show as like a YouTube clip. I can't even say that. Just watch Threads. Just don't
Yeah.
forget this ever existed.
Life is short, y'all. I mean, and why do you want to bother with bad art? I don't.
2 hours long. If it were not for the pod, I would have shut it off. It's one of those movies that I would have been like, all right, this is a waste of time.
And if I had thought more about it, I mean, it's just the one that came immediately to mind when you said.
No,
Threads.
I think it's a really good contrast with Threads. Like for the purposes of our pod too, of like, wow, if there ever was a bad American version of something not American, this is a great example.
All right.
So with that being said, let's get into Threads. I first only watched Threads because I was scrolling through Shudder, and then just the poster just jumped out at me, and I was interested, and then just sat there. And I was only kind of interested in watching maybe like a schlocky horror thing while drawing something, and then I just was so invested, and then did feel sick at the end, but in a good way. In a way that I was like, this is satisfying. So here's the brief plot summary. The effects of a nuclear holocaust on the working class city of Sheffield, England, and the eventual long-term effects of nuclear war on civilization. It was written by Barry Hines, directed by Mick Jackson, stars Paul Vaughn as the narrator, Karen Meager as Ruth Beckett, Rhys Dinsdale as Jimmy Kemp, David Brierley as Mr. Bill Kemp, Rita May as Mrs. Rita Kemp, Nicholas Lane as Michael Kemp, and Jane Hazelgrove as Allison Kemp. Cinematography by Andrew Dunn and Paul Morris, and has a runtime of 112 minutes, but I think that's good.
And covers like a much larger
time
frame.
A huge amount of time. Mom watched it on Canopy, and I watched it on my beloved Tubi. Well, and Shudder. Oh, and I guess I should say that movie is presented really as like, again, not a documentary because there's no crew, but it's just very kind of like the Andromeda strain. It just really is like, what if this happened? There you go.
And you have this narration, and like before every segment, I guess, you have like the clickety clack of like a typewriter filling up the screen with like stats, and they tell you like what Sheffield is like known for, like what it exports, and then it talks about like how much radiation has hit Sheffield and how many have died, and so you get these sort of cards in between the various segments of the movie.
Yeah, it's a good way to give like immediate like data and context on what has happened and like what these are the effects of, and then shows you our characters experiencing them. Is really effective. So before everything starts, we start in the city of Sheffield with Ruth Beckett and Jimmy Kemp. These two are a young couple, and they find out that Ruth is pregnant, and they're like, you know what? Let's get married and move in together. And I think again, this is not like The Day After in that it just feels like a more holistic view of everybody. We get Jimmy's family with, them kind of being like, how could you get a girl pregnant? How could you do this? And he's like, well, it's not my fault. And they're like, don't blame it on Ruth, And so it just seems like a more well-rounded, like, this just seems like a family. These are just a group of families.
And I really like, there's just a real quick shot of Ruth when Jimmy and his parents come over to meet her family, and she's looking down from the window, and she must have caught his eye, because she just sort of gives this look like, oh boy, here we go. And it's just real sweet, and it seems real. And this movie was mostly or entirely unknown actors. So, to give it that sort of more realistic feel. And so I had never seen her before, and I just really liked her immediately.
Yeah, I think she's engaging as kind of a character that we'll follow throughout the whole movie. And, both families are kind of well rounded out. I believe Jimmy also has a younger brother and a younger sister. And they're also displaying just because it shows the mounting tensions of, them also experiencing the events that would lead up to, nuclear war. Like, and we get it in bits and like how the characters would get it. Like, Ruth and Jimmy are in the car, and we hear in the car radio that, they say this is a time of escalating tensions in Iran, which has been invaded by the Soviet Union in response to a US-backed coup. And then, a character might turn it off because they've got to go on with their lives. And they're aware of the news and maybe getting a little bit worried. But again, it's not like you can drop everything in your life, and act as if it's coming. So people are kind of just like, and even there's a great scene where Jimmy is kind of having like a bachelor's night, like, before he gets married with his bud. And Jimmy wants to watch the news talking about, the war and whatnot and what might happen. And his friend's like, no, there's nothing we can do. So, and the thing is, this movie has a huge sense of powerlessness too. And it is true. There's nothing you or I or anyone we know would be able to do anyway. And that's like the biggest, scariest part is it could happen and I didn't even do anything to make it happen.
Right.
So basically, just tensions begin to mount, questions begin to get asked of, is this going to happen? And I remember specifically just a lot of talk over, is this an act of war? And it's, I think that stuff is very scary too, because I mean, even getting, like, I got a BBC alert the other day that the US sent really, really good high-tech tanks to Ukraine. And like those are the kind of things that they're reporting on, is like, is this a step too far? And that's again why it feels so real, because there are times where you read a bit of news like that, and then you hear somebody say like, well, this could provoke this. And it's like, Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
You're in the midst of a game, again, that you have no part in. So in the midst of all this, people are getting really worried. There's like a protest that happens that Ruth passes by. And, we get, a woman talking about how nobody wins this. They just need to de-escalate. And meanwhile, other people being like, you just want to let them drop it on us, and just tension and high energy, but also the inability to stop your just normal everyday life.
But then there becomes a point where it's clear that something bad is about to happen, and people start to panic, as they do. As everybody's seen them do, like even like when we know a hurricane's about to strike the coast or something like that.
Yeah, there begins to become a lot of panic buying as there's this ultimatum that expires, which results in an air attack on a Mashhad base, followed by a limited nuclear exchange. People are not allowed to leave Sheffield to go to the countryside. There's a huge military presence, and we have one character who's assigned to this task force. Again, it gave me very Andromeda Strain vibes of this idea of there's a group of people that are a contingency plan that never are going to be together unless for this moment. And now the moment is happening.
Yeah.
So this guy leaves his wife, this older guy, and we follow him as he's talking with all these other people that are, preparing, like, what are they going to do with survivors and food lines? Like, where should they get the rations out to? So they're starting. Even the fact that they're there means something is going to happen. We have people, buying food in a store, and prices are escalating, and so people just start looting and leaving. So then on the 25th of May, 2 nuclear explosions occur in the Middle East, and Sutton is the man who heads a emergency committee. Nobody's really trained, and there are people who don't show up, and people are just warned to stay at home. So then on the 26th of May, the public is given information on what happens if there should be nuclear fallout. Should you stay at home? All of these, really concrete steps. So then we have the time where the warning sounds. The Kemps improvise an indoor shelter. The Beckett's shelter in their cellar. Jimmy Kemp is working in a timber yard as the warning sounds, and just everybody panics. Then the UK is hit by a nuclear attack, and it's 3,000 megatons that are exchanged, and the immediate casualties are estimated at 2.5 to 9 million, and 210 megatons fall on Britain. So Jimmy is our first casualty. He's last seen running through the streets looking for Ruth, but it's over for him.
But right before that, his friend says, Jesus, like, they actually did it.
Yeah, that's a great line. We just see destruction. There's fire, people getting burned to death. Again, like, it is graphic, but they're limited, in what they're able to do. There's like a really cute kitten that's just rolling around on the ground.
I have something in the trivia about that. That cat was fine, by the way.
Oh, okay, good. Because I was like, that cat doesn't look okay. There is a weird moment, like, where there's this thing that almost looks like ET, that looks like it's melting. It's very bizarre. It's only for a brief second, and I almost thought it wasn't real. That was a bit weird. So now we see a week later, everybody is still sheltering in place. Ruth decides, she claims, I don't even care about, this baby. It's probably got all these, she's saying this, she probably has all these deformities because of all the radiation. Jimmy's dead, obviously. And Jimmy's parents, who are together in their makeshift indoor shelter, realize that their 3 children are all dead because they're not there. And Mrs. Kemp, like, half of her face is burnt off. And there's just like this scene really like hit me, where she's like just laying on like her back, and he's trying to help her with her wounds, but every time he gets close, she's just like, 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 don't touch me. And it just felt so, like, again, helpless, of like, what would you be able to do? It's like a wound that you could never, ever help, and you just have to sit there. The committee that Sutton was in are trapped underneath a collapsed town hall, and they have to decide on things like, do we give food to people who are going to obviously die? Like, they're talking about, oh, well, if the attack hit here and there's all this radiation here, they're dead, why even give food to them? But then they're all going to starve to death. These are the conversations that they have to have. In the cellar, Ruth's grandma dies, and Ruth decides to leave. She goes outside, and we see her walking outside amongst all these people who are just scarred and sitting. She passes a woman who is cradling like a baby's corpse, and it's just a very haunting scene.
That's very effective. It's just still on this woman's face, and we don't really see what she's holding, but we know that it's dead. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's very important because Ruth herself is pregnant.
Yeah.
But I love, actually, the people underground. That's my favorite storyline.
Me too. It is for me too. Like, That's what I meant when I said like there are people who are kind of dicks. I feel like the Brits are so good at that, of having characters that are kind of like, you're not, it's not like American things where it's not that, oh, if somebody's mean, they're evil. It's just these people are fucking stressed out and they don't know what to do. And all of them have different things that they have to do. And like, they are poorly trained and they're away from their families and they're just yelling at each other, you know? Oh, and there's a lot of great, like, just little haunting things. Like, right before the bombs fall down, you hear this announcement that's talking about, if there's a family member who dies, you know, cover them up, remove them. It's just very official. It's like when people tell you to wash your hands to avoid getting COVID, it's said with that same, and that's
And there's
so
this
horrible.
weird animation where these dots like go around the dead body, like you're supposed to like cover the corpse in plastic and then remove it to your backyard or something like that. But yeah, it's just this public service announcement. Like, who made that animation? Like, but yeah, it's very. Oh my God! Now we're here. We're talking about how to dispose of our dead bodies. Like,
that is, it's like getting told like, oh, somebody, either you or somebody you know, will die.
For sure.
That is going to happen. You'll see it. And this is what you got to do. And it does happen. Like, and, you know, Ruth with her grandma dying, and then in the, within the underground committee, immediately one guy has like a piece of ceiling fall on him. He's dead. And they're just like, guys, get a bag. You know, it's just, there's like a cognitive dissonance. And I think that is what's so scary about this movie.
But I like the breakdown. We see it in a number of cases, but here there's one point where, you know, they've all run out of cigarettes and like they spend a month down there, I think. And somebody's like, Barbara, you know, make some tea. And she goes, I'm not your damn wife. Whereas a month ago, you know, she was like the tea girl. But now she's like, fuck that. I'm not doing that. And I just love it's that's all you need. That's one line that tells you things have changed forever.
Yeah. So next we have the nuclear fallout. We have darkness and freezing temperatures that are caused by the 100 tons of dust in the atmosphere that completely shut out the sun. So Ruth is on the search for Jimmy and the Kemps and finds that Jimmy's mother is dead. And Jimmy, I forgot to mention, another little detail about him is that he takes care of birds. I think he takes care of pigeons or doves. And, you know, he even mentions when they're looking for a house, like, you know, maybe I can have, you know, a little place for that, you know, on the roof or something. And so when she visits the Kemp's house, she finds Jimmy's books on birds, or finds a book on birds and puts it in her bag. And so now we have, since food has to be rationed, soldiers guarding food stores and firing gases at crowds that are getting unruly. And we see the overrun hospitals that are completely ill-equipped to handle it. This scene is so harrowing. It reminds me of like scenes of the medical tent in like an army or war movie, where it's just all these people just moaning and crying with these, again, horrific wounds that just, they can't do anything. They don't have running water or anything that it. And again, I think that's just so scary about an apocalypse of like a week ago, or, you know, a year ago, we could have done this no problem, you know, and now it's unfathomable.
Right.
So now 22 days after the attack, we see that looters have murdered Ruth's parents. They enter their house and then they leave. And it's, you know, they're just unceremoniously like stepping over, you know, her grandma's covered corpse and whatnot. Survivors all have to be recruited. You know, it's not enough that you lived and survived through this. Now it's like, what are you going to do but work and rebuild Britain? Mr. Kemp is the only surviving member of his family, and we follow him for a little bit as he's working, and he just looks sick and horrible and horribly depressed. He finds his youngest son at the beginning of the movie plays this little, you know, handheld video game. He finds it somehow. I thought this was a little bit cheesy, but he finds it, plays it, and starts crying. We see that 10 million corpses remain unburied with little fuel or viable burial ground. So, what do you do then? Now, 4 weeks after the attack, armed traffic wardens guard looters in detention camps, and criminals face firing squads. Some soldiers break through underground and find the entire committee is dead.
I actually really loved that. That like really
Me
hit
too.
me. I mean, like, what else did you think was going to happen? But I still, when they found, we had known them, the audience, we had known them, and now they're just dead bodies, So it's just
that who the soldiers have they're just like, oh, yep, 5 in here.
Right, exactly.
So, like, disconnected. And I forgot to mention Mr. Kemp dies, and the way that we see that too is because they show us some photos. The photography is amazing in this movie, and so throughout when we get these little details about the this is how many days have passed and whatnot, they'll show a little photo, and just Mr. Kemp, we find him, he's dead, and that's the way it's revealed. It's just like you said, it's characters that we know, but it shows you that there's all these masses, and when this many people die, it is everybody. In subsequent weeks, Ruth and other refugees leave Sheffield to search for food. They go to the countryside. The soldiers are trying to put people in houses that have extra rooms, and so she's grouped with a bunch of people who go to this man's house. They're like, sir, you have 4 extra bedrooms. These people now live with you. And he's like, the fuck they do? he's like, you guys can't do this. And they're like, sir. And they're just like, get in there. They just shove all the people in there. And then he throws them all out. He throws, Ruth's stuff out, and she grabs it, including Jimmy's book still, and puts it back in her bag. Ruth then again is, just looking for scraps and finds Jimmy's friend from earlier, and they kind of form a little band. They find and eat a sheep in the countryside, anything, and we see that deaths from the fallout have reached their peak now. So now in September, 6 months after the attack, there have been between 17 and 38 million deaths. Now the survivors are being made to focus on agriculture, but the conditions completely prevent a harvest. And Ruth works the land as people just drop dead around her, and eventually just finds a barn and gives birth. And this scene is so scary too, because like there's like a dog chained up outside, and that's just the idea of a scary dog being next to a newly born baby just fills me with like so much fear. Luckily nothing happens.
She delivers her own baby, and she bites through the umbilical cord with her teeth.
Yeah, it's the poor Ruth, man. Like the only survivor at this point.
Through it. Yeah.
So now when the sunlight finally breaks through, there's a higher cancer risk because there's greater UV rays. So now we see 10 years after the attack, Britain's population, between 4 and 11 million, lives at medieval levels. Ruth we see her working with, we can see as her daughter in the field, and she drops. She is now then we see her in like, I guess is their little home, and she's way prematurely aged. She's like got cataracts in her eyes, white hair, missing teeth, and she dies. And I didn't even notice this the summary that I used just said something really rude. They said they used the R word, which you shouldn't do, like in reference to the daughter, just that she has like stunted.
Yeah,
I thought that was more.
I didn't get that, honestly.
I thought it was because like, how would Ruth be able to give her a full education? Like that's what I thought.
Yeah,
because she just is like, and when Ruth dies, she just is like, Ruth, work up. I thought that was just because those would be the only words she'd be taught.
I kind of thought that too. Like, she's not emotional at all, and she calls her mother by her first name. And language, we also know from other scenes, has broken down. Like the children in this and Jane's generation speak a very different version of English, and it's much more rudimentary than what we had before. So
Yeah, I don't think that's right. I love this scene where we see Ruth's daughter in this building with all these other kids, who similarly just look like dead in the face, just completely like the saddest looking bunch of kids ever. There's all these, they're watching a children's program about animals and their skeletons, and you got to think, have they ever even seen these animals now? Like, it talks about like a cat, like, what's that? It's this skeleton. And it's like, they've never seen a cat. That's so weird. I love these things because they don't tell you that, but it dawns on you, and it's scary. And we see that there's a woman, an old woman in the back who must work there or something, and we can just see her mouthing all the words to it, like she must have watched this tape like a million times. Again, little details like that they don't tell you, but inform the whole world.
right.
So Ruth's daughter eventually gets assaulted by two guys and now is in early pregnancy. She also, I should have mentioned, when Ruth dies, she takes Ruth's stuff, but puts Jimmy's bird book under Ruth's pillow. She still had it all that time. So yeah, 13 years after the attack, she's assaulted by two boys after they steal bread. And at a barren hospital, she approaches and she's like, baby. And, they're telling her, no. Like, and she just is like, baby. And she sits down, gives birth. And when they give it back to her, it's silent. It's just a dead, awful looking baby. And the last frame is just her like screaming and like, throwing it away from her. Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
And I had seen this at the time, and the only two things I remembered was Ruth's grandmother shitting herself and Ruth, and apologizing
scene.
And Ruth being like so disgusted by it, and then the final frame of the film. That's all I had remembered. But that was so effective at just communicating, the hopelessness of this outcome.
Yeah. There are no winners. It, like, honestly, if this happens, you're probably better off dying at the immediate blast. After watching this, that's what I would want. There's no point.
I remember, and again, I don't remember how old I was, but maybe it was around this time. But I remember my stepmother saying, we lived in Madison, Wisconsin, and I remember her saying, if this happens, she's getting in the car and driving to Chicago with whoever wants to come with her, because she wants to drive into the blast and not, not survive.
I agree. I'm like, if it's like this.
Can you imagine hearing that as a kid, though? I mean, that was just God. Like, what the fuck?
There's no, like, hey, if this happens, there's not even a chance of you living, because I like your parental figure saying, I'd rather be dead.
However old I was, I didn't know how to make sense of that. Like,
yeah.
It's just so, yeah.
I think that's also what's extra devastating about this fear is, like, I guess getting like any sort of leveling, I guess, or just the destruction it does and how like society would break down. I think that's just the idea of, it's not just dying that would be scary. It's the living and what exists after. That's so existentially terrifying.
Well, yeah. And of course we can imagine, in the beginning where people are like rationing food and shooting looters and, trying to form some kind of, a governing body that keeps things in order. We can imagine all of that, and the violence and the, corruption of the system. That totally makes sense. But I mean, I'm not a scientist. I hadn't thought like what it would look like a couple generations down the road. What would the
Yeah.
Earth be like? And what would happen to language? And so I mean it's great. This is a great film. It's really scary. It'll like scare you to your bones.
Yeah. And again, make you sick. Like, I know I'm saying all this and I'm like, watch it, but
it's a horror podcast. I mean, some of this stuff is, does have the capacity to make you physically sick.
I forgot to mention earlier too, they're right after the blast, like there is a part where they're just sick from the radiation poisoning. And that made me feel sick too, because it's just the hopelessness of it all.
I mean, and
you're
they tried to do this in the day after with the horrible makeup, just trying to show that, our bodies would fall apart. It's just that it's done really, in a hack way.
Yeah.
In the day after.
Like we've been saying, just I think why I find this one more effective is it just felt like a true the thing in itself is so scary that all you need to do is just show it happening. That's it. And I think that Threads does that better, whereas the day after and a lot of American media in general has to assign some sort of like story or characterization or like moral stuff to it. And I like that Threads just, you can't watch that movie and then have the outcome of nuclear war would be a good idea. You could never think that. If you did, there'd be something upsettingly wrong with you. So you don't need to put that as like a message. Again, it's so fucked up, you just have to show it, and then that's the message.
Should we do Como si dice don't look now in Italiano?
Yes.
Okay, so the original title, of course, is Threads. In Brazil, it's Catastrophe Nucléaire. In French, in Canada, the French title was Le Soleil Noir, or The Black Sun.
Ooh.
In Finland, it was When the World Ends. In Hungary, it was Yarns. In Italy, it was Ipotesi Sopravvivenza, Survival Hypothesis.
What?
It's Italy, what the fuck? And in Norway, it was Doomsday.
Dommedag.
Dommedag. In the aftermath of the nuclear blast, footage of a cat supposedly, quote, suffocating outside in the extreme heat is shown. This is actually footage of a cat enjoying a hefty dose of catnip. Then they just reverse the film to give the impression of the cat suffocating. But the cat
I did think fine. See, and it must have been that it was reversed. I didn't notice that, but I just thought the way it was moving was so like unsettling.
Right. Yeah. While shooting the movie, the BBC got in trouble with the local police when they detonated a large smoke bomb in order to simulate a nuclear explosion. Members of the public who were not aware that a movie was being shot panicked and thought that a real explosion had occurred.
Oh no, those poor people.
In the film, a Salvation Army brass band is seen marching down a street during a demonstration. This was not scripted. The band was returning from an open-air service and had unexpectedly marched in on the filming. The director loved the unexpected interruption and kept the cameras rolling. Shortly after the film's broadcast on the BBC, Ronald Reagan made a speech that was less aggressive than expected. A cartoon on the front of the London Times depicted one person reading a headline, "Reagan makes peace speech," and another asking, "Do you think that he saw Threads?"
That's great.
Mick Jackson later recalled that while BBC productions would usually be followed by phone calls of congratulations from friends or colleagues immediately after airing, no such calls came after the first screening of Threads. Jackson later, quote, realized that people had just sat there thinking about it, in many cases not sleeping or being able to talk, unquote. He later said that he had it on good authority that Ronald Reagan watched the film when it aired in the U.S., Screenwriter Barry Hines himself received a letter of praise from Labour leader Neil Kinnock.
Wow.
This was shot in 17 days.
What?
I know.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
I was amazed too.
There's so many people in this movie. How did they do that?
The makeup for extras playing third-degree burn victims consisted of Rice Krispies and tomato ketchup.
Ew.
Threads was the most watched program on BBC Two that week with 6.9 million viewers.
Wow.
The film takes place in 1988, 1998, 2001, and 2003. As part of their research, Mick Jackson and Barry Hines spent a week at the Home Office Training Center for, quote, official survivors in Easingwood, which, according to Hines, showed just how disorganized post-war reconstruction would be.
And
captured it.
I think the same would be true for America.
Oh, people are people. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
The umbilical cord for Ruth's baby that she has to sever with her teeth was made out of licorice. Now, this last one, I don't know if this is true. WoHos, get in touch. Ruth survived the radiation due to being pregnant. Radiation attacks the unborn baby cells before affecting the mother. It explains why her daughter was deformed and technically should have died within weeks of birth due to radiation poisoning. And the source of that is Radiation and Its Effect on Living Cells from 1998. But I want to know more.
Yeah,
and Jane isn't shown as deformed. Maybe a little slow, but I think it's not explicitly shown.
Yeah, I feel like I never would have gotten that reading of like that's why she talks the way she does.
Right.
Like, I totally don't think that's what it is, or it shouldn't be.
I mean, yeah, and if that's what they were going for, it wasn't clear.
No.
What does Letterboxd have to say about it?
Scarlett Eller gave it 5 stars and said, "I've never before had a horror or apocalypse film so thoroughly put me into the shoes of its characters." Shoes. Put me into the shoes of its characters. One of the most impactful films I've ever seen. Awful watch on a Wednesday evening. Con AFC gave it 5 stars and said, "The most chilling anti-war film and quite possibly the scariest film I've ever seen. The level of research that's gone into this to make it as realistic as possible is astounding. Horror films don't usually get to me. The Reds meant I didn't sleep that night. Masterpiece. 10 out of 10. I feel like I wrote this review. Christopher Eifler gave it 5 stars and said, "Tubi is so mother for having this." Agreed. Hell Nah gave it 5 stars and said, "How was this aired as a TV movie?" Yeah. Norm Coleman gave it 5 stars and said, "Quintessentially British in its atmosphere and sobering presentation, but the film's depiction of societal despondency in the aftermath of nuclear war touches on a universal feeling of terror all men must feel when face to face with the knowledge of their own vulnerability and hubris." I do think this movie is quintessentially British. And I say that with affection.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Cookie Cat gave it a 1/2 star and said, "Did I watch the same movie as everyone else? That was boring and dull. Not sure why so many high rating reviews." Interesting. I disagree. We_Wait gave it a 1/2 star and said, "BBC propaganda against the USSR. What is worse than a propaganda movie? A low budget propaganda movie."
Disagree.
Looking at the news, a few decades later, I'm kind of like, well, who am I thinking of when I think of if it's going to happen, who it's going to be against? Anybody else? Like, Meg gave it a 1/2 star and said, "I couldn't understand half the shit they were saying."
Which is fair, but I think you'll find, Meg, that if your TV is anything like mine, there's this option if you hit the asterisk key on your remote to put closed captioning on.
Listen, I sometimes need closed captioning when listening to the British or the Scottish, you know,
especially the Scottish.
Sometimes, and
don't let me get started on the Irish. How about the Welsh?
Oof. Sorry, guys, but I need the subtitles. After watching a lot of Lemmy Show, you can kind of tap into some like really heavy, thick Scottish accents. It is a whole different set of like. Mm-hmm. It's different. It's different.
I mean, even if people are speaking English, I mean, I have subtitles on all the time.
Oh, same.
But I mean, even Australian or New Zealanders, I mean, they're speaking English, but you know, and also there's just slang and you know,
some American accents.
Yeah, there are some American accents that are hard to decipher. So, but yeah, I don't understand in this day and age with all this technology why you wouldn't avail yourself of it.
Yeah, and yeah. But if that's just a joke about their accents, it did make me laugh.
Oh, then that was kind of funny. That's why I put it last.
Let's rate this in licorice umbilical cords.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
I'd give it 5.
First of all, I think umbilical cords are kind of gross anyway. Like,
oh, they're disgusting.
Like,
I hate it whenever they're depicted.
No, I don't know if you know this, Mac, but like well, I don't know if they do this anymore, but you know, like when your brother was born, they just sort of, you know, they cut it and then they tie it and then it just sort of like, but there's like a length, like maybe an inch that like falls off eventually.
And it just stays on you.
Yeah, they like clip it kind of and oh my gosh, says it. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's cool and everything. Way umbilical cords
no,
work, but I mean they're gross as fuck. Okay,
it's like,
but I gave it 4 on Letterboxd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would go 4. I would go higher. I would go 4.25. My patented.
Oh, okay, 4.25.
Yeah.
What have we learned?
Oh Jesus! Well, you don't need a lot of money to tell a good story.
Mm-hmm. Don't engage in nuclear war. Listen,
oh,
Putin.
There's that, yeah.
Putin, Biden, if you're listening, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Putin listening to this, well. Like his finger was on the button and
Vladimir's
he was like,
oh.
Wait, Mac doesn't want me to do it.
Mac makes a very good point.
Hey, don't.
Hey, don't. How about not?
Putin, please.
That's the name of the episode for sure.
Putin, please. Would we watch it again? Yes.
Yeah, and I saw some reviews, and I mean, everyone's, you know, entitled to whatever, but some people were like, this is a masterpiece. I'm never watching it again. And I can respect that, but I think it's a solid film, you know, and it's devastating, but I'd watch it again.
Yeah, I would too. Do you have a favorite in this context scene/kill?
Takes on a different meaning when you're talking about like an annihilation of millions of people. I gotta say, when she's walking through the city and she's just sort of witnessing all the destruction, it's mm-hmm. It's on the edge of being cheesy, but then when it lands on the woman with the corpse of the baby in her arms, there's mm-hmm. something about that woman's face that is so haunting. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really powerful. I also liked how the kids are just gathered around that VCR watching that old TV program.
Yeah, they just have nothing. They just seem so hopeless too. It's just all of it is so sad.
How about you?
So much of it is so like powerful to me. I guess like when they depict when the bomb drops and right after that, those parts were just really like, I guess the Kemps, those two, there was something about Mr. and Mrs. Kemp where their scenes were particularly scary to me, especially when Mr. Kemp dies too. I just, again, the way that they show it and just the idea that he's just another body among a bunch is just, that idea is so scary that it could be like you or somebody that you love in the grand scheme of like if a million people died would just be another body on the pile is just the scariest idea.
And just going back to Testament for a moment, and I mean, okay, I'm spoiling, a movie from 1984, but there's just no lead up to this one section where all of a sudden you see her sitting at the bedside where her last child's body has been wrapped in a sheet. And it's sort of like you knew it was coming, but just that stark visual, to me, I don't think I'm going to forget that for a while. I thought that was like super powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we shut it down, Mac?
Shut it down.
All right. Thank you for joining us for this episode and for all your support. It means the world of horror to us, truly. Next time, we are going to go a little off program, and we will be covering 2 movies from an actor who means the world of horror to us. Song Kang-ho. We will be reviewing The Host from 2006 and Parasite from 2019. We would welcome your support in the form of a 5-star review or thumbs up on your preferred listening platform. Hey, Mac, what do you have going on?
Well, you can follow me on my art Instagram at Macaritaville and also on Tumblr at Macaritaville.
Awesome. And, coming soon this spring, Mac and I will be incorporating into Mom and Mac Industries, which will be our umbrella corporation involving the podcast as well as our separate artistic pursuit. So please stay tuned for that. And remember, WoHos, we love you and don't go into the basement.